mean, just to take as a recent example, what happened in Minneapolis, I think that the normie response to what happened in Minneapolis is, this is obviously a tragedy from a sort of legal perspective. Putting on my lawyer hat, the intent of Renee Good is not relevant to the question of the intent of the officer, right? If you're gonna prosecute the officer, then you'd have to determine whether an objective, reasonable officer would have perceived that he was being threatened by her vehicle when he shot her. And it seems to me that you could voice a fairly strong defense in a court of law that an objectively reasonable officer, since he actually was nudged with the car at the very least, would have perceived it that way. Now, this immediately broke down into two separate narratives, both of which I think are untrue. One was a narrative that was immediately pushed by the Trump administration and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, that she was a domestic terrorist who was attempting to run over officers with her car and was legitimately trying, not just this officer, but multiple officers. That was the original statement. I said at the time, I thought that was untrue. And then your press office tweeted out that it was state-sponsored terrorism, which, I mean, Governor, aggressive. I do have to ask you about that. That sort of thing makes our politics worse.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. Yeah. I mean, our ICE officers obviously are not terrorists.
Yeah.
A tragic situation is not state-sponsored terrorism.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, when it comes to ICE, I mean, I'll ask you this just generally about policy with regard to ICE, because obviously it's become incredibly contentious given what the federal government is doing in states like California. It seems to me that there have been a number of deportations from red states, right, where there are governors and localities working with ICE. California is a sanctuary state, which makes it much more difficult for local law enforcement to hand over information to ICE about deportation status. What's the purpose of that? Wouldn't best policy, you're pragmatic, you talk about your pragmatism all the time, wouldn't best policy be to cooperate with ICE in the vast majority of cases? So instead of ICE going to, as you say, hospitals and churches to pick people up, they'd be going to jailhouses to pick people up.
That's exactly what they do in California, and we have over 10,000 that I've cooperated with since I've been governor of California. We work very directly with ICE as it relates to CDCR, our state prison. California has cooperated with more ICE transfers probably than any other state in the country, and I vetoed multiple pieces of legislation that have come from my legislature to stop the ability for the state of California to do that. So when it comes to the issues of violent criminals, when it comes to felons, people that are being released from the largest state system in the United States of America, California cooperates with ICE.
Okay, but why is it then, what makes it a sanctuary state?
The broader sanctuary policies that are established, and we had a policy that was established under Governor Brown, SB 54. You have city sanctuary policies that go back quite literally to the time Ronald Reagan was governor, as it relates to some of the issues in Central America, sort of the origin stories. But at bottom line, as it relates to those policies, this notion that federal law should be enforced by federal law enforcement agencies, that we should not consign local law enforcement to federal responsibilities and prioritization.
Right, but shouldn't the state step in with localities and tell localities that they ought to cooperate better with ICE, thus to facilitate?
Well, I have sort of Rudy Giuliani's point of view, who made the point as an advocate for sanctuary policy when he was mayor of New York. He said it keeps people safer, healthier, and more educated. Safer in the context that it allows community members to be more likely to participate as witnesses of crime or victims of crime in going after the perpetrators, more likely to get an immunization shot if they're not worried about the nurse turning them over to ICE, more likely to go to school and get educated if they're not worried about the school crossing guard crossing them and ultimately turning them over to ICE. So it's the tool of pragmatism because of the complete abject failure of the federal government. A sanctuary policy is unnecessary if we had comprehensive immigration reform and we had a federal response that was adequate to the task. But in the absence of that, it's grown from the 70s and 80s and 90s, 2000s. And obviously I got here as governor and we had an established framework before I got here.
But it is true that sanctuary policy obviously has had a massive impact as a driver of tremendous number of illegal immigrants in the state of California.
I don't know about that. I mean, you see in a lot of states that don't have sanctuary policies, huge increase in immigration, illegal immigration, massive increases, even far greater than the state of California. Just look as an example. But in terms of
the cost structure, I mean, you recently, for example, had to freeze the enrollment of undocumented immigrants in state health systems to save money, right? I mean, these are major burdens, no?
That's a separate issue. There are 12 states that provide health care for undocs, and we believe in universal health care regardless of pre-existing conditions.
My only point is that the cost structure is extraordinarily burdensome.
But I don't think in unpacking it, I don't think it's the sanctuary policies that are driving that. And I'll give you a proof point. Florida doesn't have sanctuary policy, huge increase in undocumented community. Huge increase in Texas. It's not a driver, their sanctuary policies. They don't have sanctuary policies in those states. The state of California's policies, I don't think in that respect, have invited people into our state. And I use those as, I think, proof points of that. And that's a different. So the notion of how do you deal with people that are here 10, 15 years? How do you deal with mixed status families in the state? And how do you provide for health care as opposed to emergency care and stabilize populations and community health? It's a different approach. It's one that we've been very transparent about. It's one that's hardly unique because in every state, they provide compensated care for undocs at the emergency room. Many states provide it for children, many for seniors. California provides it across the board.
I mean, the biggest problem, though, as somebody who left the state, is that the cost structure in the state has become so burdensome, not just because of illegal immigration, but generally. And so the idea that policy has no impact as a magnet for particular human behavior or alienating people from a state, that's clearly untrue.
Yeah,
and when you look at the homeless population, for example, friendlier policies toward providing services in Santa Monica
Separate
led to
point, though. But now
yes.
you're getting a homeless policy, not immigration policy.
No, but I want to stick with immigration policy.
No,
if you make it easier for illegal immigrants,
but let's stick with immigration
not to
policy.
avoid ICE, then presumably.
No, look, I appreciate this. So we've established an important. I appreciate the question because I'm glad we've established that we do cooperate with ICE in California. In particular, this governor, who's, as I said, on multiple occasions vetoed efforts to stop me from that coordination for dangerous criminals, and we've done that over 10,000 folks.
So it'd be wrong for. So when AOC said this week that ICE should be abolished, you disagree?
Oh, I disagree. When I think a candidate for president by the name of Harris said that in the last campaign. I came out. I remember being on Chris Hayes hours later saying I think that's a mistake. So absolutely. Number two, as it relates to the issue of sanctuary policy, I think it's important to establish because it's not well established. Sanctuary jurisdictions have lower crime rates than non-sanctuary jurisdictions. So this notion that it somehow increases crime is also, I think, contradicted on the basis of the facts. So this notion that population, it becomes an attractive nature for population increases, I think is contradicted by the facts. As it relates to crime, it's contradicted by the facts, but there's unquestionably, and you're right about this, as it relates to an expansion of services, but not just for sanctuary jurisdictions, for population, diverse populations. Yes, there are states like California that have chosen a different approach.